my friend. Welcome to this quiet corner of the night. My name is Mayra, and I want you to know you're not alone. Wherever you are, however you feel, I'm right here with you. No judgment, no rush, just a safe, soft space to rest. If your heart feels tired tonight, if your mind won't settle, or the weight of the day is still clinging to your shoulders, this story is for you. You don't need to do anything right now. You don't need to fix or solve or carry anything. You are already enough, and it's okay to rest now. Tonight, I'll take you to a quiet forest where a gentle creature named Mosswhistle lives among whispering trees and glowing moss. He's kind, thoughtful, a little unsure of the world, but brave in his own small way. He's setting off on a journey, and I think in some way he might be walking beside you. But before we follow him, let's take a moment to let the ache soften, to breathe, not deeply or perfectly, just kindly. If you're holding tension, you don't have to force it away. Just notice it and let it know. It doesn't need to protect you right now. You are safe. If you're carrying grief, I won't tell you to let it go, but I will offer you this. Tonight, you don't have to carry it alone. Let it sit beside you. Let it be quiet with you. This is a story with no sharp edges. A story that won't ask anything from you. A story where small things matter and kindness leaves echoes. So rest if you can, or just listen. Let the sound of this voice keep you company. Let the world fall away and let Mosswhistle, soft-footed, slow-moving, heart-wide, lead you down a forest path toward comfort, toward stillness, and perhaps toward a little peace. In the fold of a green blanketed valley, just where the old map makers used to stop drawing, lay a place the world had forgotten how to find. It was called Mist Grove Hollow, though it never appeared on railway timetables, weather charts, or tourist pamphlets. The forest there did not shout, did not boast tall mountains or dramatic cliffs. It whispered. Mist Grove was made of small things. moss like velvet draped over sleeping stones, tiny waterfalls that trickled from roots, mushrooms that glowed faintly in the dusk. There were no roads, only woven paths created not by footsteps, but by the quiet agreement of trees. And deep within this hidden place, in the nook of a willow tree that had once been struck by lightning but had kindly recovered, lived a creature named Mosswhistle. He was a wimkin, a small roundish creature that most people would mistake for a particularly polite badger or a sleepy fox wearing a coat. His ears were leaf-shaped, his nose soft and black like a blackberry, and his fur a blend of bark and silver moss. He wore a green satchel made from folded fern leaves and always carried a little wooden spoon, just in case he came across jam. Mosswhistle lived alone, but he was never lonely. His days were filled with slow rituals, warming acorn tea over a pebble stove, sweeping fallen petals from his doorstep, and writing thoughtful letters to birds who never wrote back. He kept a shelf full of jars, not just of jam and preserves, but memories. Inside one, a single feather from a sky he once flew under. Inside another, laughter caught in a leaf on a windy day. He spoke to the trees, and sometimes they spoke back. Not with words, but with rustling approval, or the gentle creak of bark remembering something kind. His favorite time was early morning, when fog sat gently on the grass like a blanket that hadn't quite been folded. That was when the forest felt most like home, not just a place, but a being, breathing, humming, keeping stories beneath its roots. On this particular morning, Mosswhistle was sitting outside his tree home, stirring honey into porridge with one paw and feeding crumbs to a beetle with the other. The beetle's name was Tumbler, though he rarely answered to it. "It's going to be a soft weather day," Mosswhistle said aloud, even though Tumbler was the only one there. "A good day for remembering." He paused. Something had shifted in the air. Not a storm, not danger, just a feeling. He turned his head slightly, ears twitching. There, caught in a breeze that smelled faintly of lemon balm, came a sound. Not quite a voice, not quite a song, but familiar. It was the hum of people. Not the people of the forest, not squirrels, nor wandering badgers. These were shoes on pavement, umbrella-carrying, tea and porcelain people. Human people. It had been many seasons since any had passed through Mist Grove. Mosswhistle stood slowly. He walked to the edge of the hollow, where the forest grew stillest, and peered through the trees. And there, just beyond the wild hedges and brambles, was a thing that did not belong, a painted sign. It was old, cracked by time, but still legible. Fernbell, 2 miles by foot, if you're patient. Mosswhistle blinked. He remembered the name. Long ago, before most people stopped listening to small things, a family had once visited the hollow. A girl had left him a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. She'd laughed when he tried to say thank you because it came out more like thanku. He'd never forgotten that laugh. And now the sign was back. Something inside his mossy chest fluttered. It wasn't fear, not quite. It was the beginning of a journey. That evening he packed. Only the essentials. A few jars of thistle jam, a tiny map drawn on a leaf, and a scarf that smelled like pine needles. He tied a note to his front door in case the birds stopped by. Gone for a wander. Please water the spider plants. And before the moon had fully risen, Mosswhistle stepped beyond the edge of Mist Grove Hollow, his paw prints vanishing softly into the damp earth behind him. Mosswhistle had never left Mist Grove Hollow before. Not properly. He had wandered to the edge once or twice, where the trees grew thinner and the sky opened wider, but always returned home by tea time. The world beyond had always felt too fast, too noisy, too full of metal and shoes that didn't listen to the ground. But something had changed. That night, after he packed his jam jars and hand-drawn map, Mosswhistle curled up on a pillow of dried thistle fluff and tried to sleep. But sleep did not come easily. Instead, a memory came. It was faint, like fog on a window pane, there and not there. The kind of memory that smelled like old wood and summer grass. He had been much younger, and the hollow had been full of sounds. Not the usual rustlings and creaks, but new ones. Voices. Human voices. There had been a little girl with a yellow scarf and knees covered in plasters. She had wandered into the hollow with her parents, kind people who smelled of rain and baked apples. They hadn't stayed long, just a day, maybe two, but she had seen him, really seen him. Most humans didn't. They walked past Wimpkin like smoke, forgetting them before the next breath. But this girl had knelt down, offered him a marmalade sandwich, and called him Mr. Mossy. She had laughed when he tried to say her name. He had asked where she came from, and she'd pointed beyond the trees. Fernbell, she said. It's got a clock that sings and a shop that smells like cinnamon. Before she left, she'd said something he hadn't thought of in years. If you ever get lonely, come find us. Promise? And Mosswhistle had said, quite seriously, I do promise. On my best moss. Back then, he didn't expect to keep it. It was just something nice to say before goodbye. But now, standing on the edge of the hollow with his satchel on one shoulder and a scarf wrapped snugly around his neck, Mosswhistle felt the pull of that promise, a tug in the chest like a memory that grew roots. The wind blew through the trees behind him. It carried with it something strange, the faintest hint of orange peel and city air. It made his ears twitch. He took a breath and stepped forward. The world outside Mist Grove smelled different. Not bad, just elsewhere. The soil was drier, the trees taller and straighter, the birds more suspicious. A squirrel threw a nut at him as he passed. He tipped his hat to it anyway. He followed the sign for Fernbell, which pointed toward a path so narrow and overgrown that it barely qualified as one. He stepped carefully, his small feet making almost no sound. The satchel clinked softly with glass jars and folded paper. At midday, he stopped at a creek to eat a thimble of jam and a biscuit shaped like a leaf. He shared a few crumbs with a crow who sat nearby, watching him with one eye. "Off to Fernbell," he told the bird. The crow cawed once, then flew off as if delivering the message. The further he walked, the more the forest changed. The air grew crisper. Trees wore coats of ivy. Fewer mushrooms, more rocks. Mosswhistle stopped once to tie his boots and realized the wind was whispering again, not in words, but in the kind of sound that nudges you gently from behind. He paused at a tall hill and looked back. Mist Grove was gone, hidden now behind folds of green and distance. But ahead, something new shimmered between the trees. Not gold, not light, but possibility. He didn't know if the girl would still be there. She might be grown now. She might have forgotten him. But a promise is a promise, especially when made on moss. And so Mosswhistle walked on, quietly, steadily, into the story that was waiting for him. Mosswhistle had never seen a train. He had heard one once, a low, faraway rumble that made the birds pause mid-chirp and the earth hold its breath for just a moment. He imagined it was some kind of dragon, all steam and clanking iron scales. He hadn't expected it to smell like soot and sandwiches. By midday, the trail had flattened and narrowed into a gravel path with strange, soft edges. There was less bird song here, more wires overhead. The trees grew farther apart, and the wind smelled of rust and toast. Then he found it, the railway hedge. It wasn't marked on any map, but it was the clear dividing line between what the forest knew and what it didn't. A low, leafy wall running along the edge of the train tracks, thick with brambles and ferns, as though nature had tried very politely to say, "We'll go no further, thank you." Mosswhistle stood before it, nose twitching. On the other side he could see buildings, just a few, their chimneys rising like fingers trying to catch clouds. He heard the clang of something metal, and then a burst of laughter that sounded like it belonged to a dozen people at once. He wasn't afraid, not exactly, but he was aware of how small he was, of how odd he might look to others, of how humans had a habit of missing quiet things and squashing delicate ones. Still, he had come this far. He took a breath, adjusted the strap of his satchel, and pushed through the hedge. On the other side, everything was louder, not with shouting, but with existence. Wheels turning, birds in cages, a bicycle bell, a dog barking in the distance. A puff of steam rose from the tracks just as Mosswhistle stepped onto the platform. He froze. People. Tall ones, wide ones, children with candy-smeared cheeks, an old man with a coat made entirely of pockets. They bustled, wandered, talked in rushing words that tumbled over each other. No one noticed Mosswhistle, not at first. He shuffled to the edge of the platform and sat beside a wooden bench, tucking his tail politely around his paws. His ears perked, catching snippets of conversation. "Clock's been late 3 days now, I tell you. Raspberry buns 2 for the price of 1. Some creature ran across the tracks this morning, looked like a moving bush with feet." Mosswhistle blinked. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a little notepad made of birch bark. He scribbled, "Humans speak faster than birds, less rhythm, more crumbs." Just then, a loud whistle pierced the air. The ground trembled slightly. A train pulled. Into the station, Mosswhistle's fur stood on end. It was enormous, all clatter and hissing and windows full of faces. He ducked behind the bench, not from fear, but from caution. From his hiding spot, he watched the doors open. People stepped out, laughing, calling, dragging suitcases. One little boy held a balloon shaped like a teapot. Mosswhistle stared at it for a long time. And then, just as he was about to peek out again, someone saw him. A girl, not the one from his memory, not the marmalade sandwich girl. This one was older, maybe 10, with a braid like a rope and eyes the color of polished river stones. She was holding a book titled "The Language of Moths" and chewing the end of her pencil. She looked at Mosswhistle and blinked. Mosswhistle blinked back. Neither of them spoke. For one long, soft moment, they just looked. Then the girl smiled, just a little, and said, "You're not supposed to be here." Mosswhistle tilted his head. "Neither are you," he replied. The girl laughed. And with that, something shifted. The platform, the noise, the strangers. It all softened. The world became just a bit more curious, a bit more kind. The girl sat down beside him, cross-legged. "I'm Iska," she said. Mosswhistle nodded. "I'm Mosswhistle. I've come to find a promise." Iska didn't ask what he meant. She just nodded, as if she understood already. The train hissed once more and rolled away. The two of them sat quietly as the sun began to lower behind the trees. and Mosswhistle realized that even in a world full of humans, there might still be people who saw small things. Fernbell was not a large town, nor an important one. It had no towers, no monuments, and certainly no wizards, unless you counted the baker who could turn burned flour and cold jam into something you'd remember all your life. But it had charm, the sort that grew slowly like ivy up old walls. There were cobbled streets that curved like questions, teapots displayed in windows, fences painted in blues and greens and yellows, so pale they looked like forgotten sky. Cats lounged on windowsills like royalty. Everyone knew someone who once chased a goose through the bakery. This was where Mosswhistle now found himself, trailing just behind Iska, who walked like someone who never needed to rush but always arrived on time anyway. The townspeople didn't notice him at first. To them, he was a small coat, or a bit of moss with feet, or a strange child's toy in motion. He passed unnoticed by men unloading fruit carts, by grandmothers gossiping with watering cans in hand, by dogs too sleepy to care. But the town noticed him. Doors creaked open just a second longer. A gust of wind cleared dust from a bench as he passed. A shop bell rang twice, even though no one had touched it. Iska led him to her favorite place, the Teapot and Turnip, a cozy little shop that sold exactly what the name promised, along with odd books, honey in glass jars, and mismatched socks in bundles of 3. The owner, Mrs. Pindle, was a woman who looked like she had once argued with a storm and won. Her hair resembled rising dough, and her spectacles were always sliding down her nose. She looked at Mosswhistle, narrowed her eyes, and said, "You'll want the raspberry one." Mosswhistle blinked. "Pardon?" "Jam," she said. "I know a jam lover when I see one." She handed him a tiny scone the size of a walnut and returned to stirring a pot that smelled like ginger and stories. Iska smiled. "Told you no one here would scream." "Well," Mosswhistle said thoughtfully, "one squirrel did throw a nut at me." They sat near the window, watching the world walk by. Children in school uniforms, a man with a ladder twice his height, a woman whose dog carried her purse. Mosswhistle found it all terribly fascinating. "Do people live here forever?" he asked. "No," Iska said, "but the town remembers everyone who does." He nodded slowly. "That's good. The forest remembers too, but it doesn't use names." After tea, they wandered. Mosswhistle paused to inspect a drain pipe shaped like a dragon. He spoke politely to a pigeon and apologized to a flower box he accidentally bumped. He caused a small scene at the market when he mistook a jar of shoe polish for plum jam. The vendor, a round man with eyebrows like broom bristles, didn't quite know whether to be cross or amazed. "Never seen a walking shrub before," he muttered, then gave Mosswhistle a sample of real plum jam, just in case you get confused again. By evening, the lamplighters were moving through the streets with long poles, setting small fires in glass cages overhead. The town changed color, from gold to amber, from sunlight to hush. Iska led Mosswhistle to her home, a small house tucked between a tailor's and a bookbinder's. The door had a bell that chimed like wind through leaves. Inside, the walls smelled of ink and old wood. "Your family?" Mosswhistle asked. Quietly, Iska shook her head. "My aunt, my parents are traveling. They're always traveling." She offered him a cushion by the fire. "You can stay as long as you like," she said. Mosswhistle nodded slowly. "Thank you. I'm still looking for a girl with a yellow scarf. She made me promise." Iska didn't laugh. She simply said, "Well, this is Fernbell. If she's anywhere, she'll turn up." That night, as the town hummed its sleepy tune outside the windows, Mosswhistle looked around the warm little house, the books stacked in crooked towers, the blanket that smelled faintly of cinnamon, the cup of tea cooling by his side, and thought, maybe promises take time. Maybe some of them grow slowly, like jam, or ivy, or belonging. The next morning, Fernbell smelled of rain, even though it hadn't rained. The sky was pale and quiet, and the streets glistened faintly, as if they'd been dreaming of thunderstorms. Mosswhistle emerged from Iska's home with his satchel over one shoulder and a hopeful bit of toast in his paw. Today, he was determined to visit the clock tower. He had seen it the day before, rising above the town like a kindly old tree, not imposing, just tall with purpose. It had a bronze bell and wooden beams, and the hour hand moved with the kind of carefulness usually reserved for knitting. Everyone in Fernbell trusted the clock tower. It told time not just for trains, but for teacups, for lullabies, and for when to flip the sign from open to closed, but knock anyway. Iska said the tower was cared for by a quiet man named Mr. Grigg and his daughter, Unwin. Mosswhistle liked the name Unwin. It sounded like wind through feathers. He found the clockmaker's shop at the base of the tower, a crooked little place with dusty windows and dozens of clocks inside, each ticking at slightly different rhythms. He stepped in with a jingle of the bell overhead. It was not the kind of shop that welcomed visitors. The air smelled of brass and silence. Clocks ticked like whispered secrets, and the floor creaked in a way that sounded judgmental. Behind the counter stood Unwin. She was perhaps 14, with dark hair cut blunt at the shoulders and a scowl that had clearly been practiced. She wore goggles on her head and a vest full of tools. She looked up when Mosswhistle entered and narrowed her eyes. "You're that forest thing," she said flatly. Mosswhistle nodded politely. "I suppose I am." Unwin raised an eyebrow. "Are you here to break something or fix something?" "I was hoping to learn something." She stared at him for a moment longer, then turned and disappeared into the back room. Mosswhistle waited. He examined the clocks. One had ants painted on the hands. Another ticked backwards. A third had no numbers, only small drawings of teacups. Eventually, Anwen returned with a biscuit and a cup of tea. She set them down without looking at him. "The clocks don't like talking much, but you can sit." So he did. That became their pattern. Each morning, Mosswhistle would come to the shop. He would sit. Unwin would mostly ignore him, polishing gears, rebalancing pendulums, or rewinding a music box shaped like a snail. Mosswhistle didn't mind. He liked the quiet. Sometimes he asked questions. "Do clocks get lonely when they stop ticking?" "Why do broken things hum when you hold them gently?" "Can time be folded like a blanket?" Anwen rarely answered, but one afternoon she looked up from a brass cuckoo and asked, "Why do you keep coming back?" Mosswhistle sipped his tea. "Because it's peaceful. Because I like the ticking. Because you remind me of an acorn that hasn't sprouted yet." Unwin blinked. "That's not a compliment." "It is in the forest," he said. She looked at him, really looked, for the first time. "My mom used to say that." Mosswhistle tilted his head. "She was the real clockmaker," Anwen said softly. "Dad just polishes." She could hear the gears like music. "Where is she now?" "Gone." The word sat heavy in the air, but not hard. Mosswhistle nodded. "The forest remembers people even when they're gone. I bet the clocks do too." From then on, things changed. Only slightly, but meaningfully. Anwen began letting him wind the simpler clocks. She explained how to fix a wobbly hand. She even let him hold a pocket watch that had belonged to her mother. One day, she handed him a gear that sparkled faintly, like it had stored sunlight inside it. "This doesn't go in any clock," she said. "It just showed up one day." Mosswhistle smiled and took it carefully. "Then it's probably meant for something new." That evening, as Mosswhistle walked home through the golden streets of Fernbell, he felt something bloom inside him. Not loud, not sudden, just a soft unfolding. Even in places full of ticking and silence, hearts could be gently rewound. Once a year, when the wind changed direction and the baker began using too much cinnamon, the town of Fernbell celebrated its most unusual tradition, the Teacup Festival. No one quite remembered how it started. Some said it began when a traveling merchant once gave away teacups in exchange for laughter. Others believed it had something to do with a spilled spell and a very angry goose. But each year, without fail, Fernbell transformed into a town of hanging banners, clinking porcelain, and music that made your feet sway before your thoughts caught up. On the morning of the festival, Mosswhistle woke to the scent of sweet steam and the sound of violins warming up. Iska had left him a note scrawled on the kitchen table. "You'll need a ribbon. Come find me near the singing fountain." He blinked at the words, then at the basket left beside the note. Inside, a pink ribbon, frayed but proud. A small pin with a daisy painted on it, and a scone wrapped in wax paper. Mosswhistle tied the ribbon around his satchel, pinned the daisy to his fur, and munched the scone as he wandered into town. Fernbell was unrecognizable in the best way. Every shop window was filled with teacups, painted ones, chipped ones, ones shaped like birds or boats. Ribbons hung like vines between lampposts. Chalk drawings bloomed across the cobblestones. Suns, stars, frogs in top hats. Children wore teacups as hats. Grown-ups balanced spoons on their noses. Music floated on the air like dust motes, and laughter bubbled from every street. And in the center of it all was the singing fountain, a large, round stone basin shaped like a lily blossom. Its waters hummed a soft, ever-changing tune, especially when someone nearby told a secret or a joke. Iska found him first. "You look ready," she said, giving his daisy pin an approving nod. "What do we do?" Mosswhistle asked, eyes wide. Iska grinned. "Everything and nothing. It's a day for joy." So they danced, badly but enthusiastically. They painted cups with pine needle brushes. They joined a parade led by a cat wearing spectacles. Mosswhistle entered a jam contest accidentally and won second place without knowing he'd been judged. Even Anwen appeared, standing awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, holding a teacup with tiny gears glued to the side. When Mosswhistle waved, she gave the smallest smile, and it felt like sunlight poking through after a long nap. Then came the story pouring. Each year, as the sun began to dip and the light turned honey-colored, the townspeople gathered near the fountain. One by one, they poured a little tea from their favorite cup into the basin and shared a memory. The mayor went first, a tall woman with a laugh like thunder. "To my grandfather," she said, pouring a swirl of peppermint tea. "He taught me how to whistle through a keyhole." A boy poured chamomile. "To my rabbit Buttons. He never learned tricks, but he always listened." Iska nudged Mosswhistle. He hesitated, then stepped forward. He poured a thimble of berry tea, homemade, into the fountain. The water shimmered rose pink. "To the girl who gave me a sandwich and said I could come find her if I was ever lonely, he said softly. I'm still looking, but this town, it feels a little like her. There was a hush. The fountain's song changed ever so slightly. It hummed a tune no one had heard before, gentle, earthy, and sweet, like wind through forest branches. No one said anything, but several people, quietly, began refilling their cups and listening harder. As the stars appeared, the townsfolk lit lanterns and floated them into the air. One by one, little glowing cups drifted upward, bobbing like sleepy fireflies on invisible strings. And Mosswhistle, watching them, felt a strange warmth grow in his chest. The kind of warmth that says, "You may not be home yet, but you're close enough to rest a while." It began with the wind. For as long as anyone in Fernbell could remember, the wind had always behaved politely. It rustled hedges without scaring them. It carried scents without stealing them. And it helped the clotheslines do their work with a light-hearted hum. But the morning after the teacup festival, the wind changed. It didn't howl or slam or shout. It just forgot. Forgot to be gentle. Forgot to knock before entering. It pressed too hard on windows. It made weather vanes spin in the wrong direction. It knocked over a tray of croissants at the bakery and blew someone's spectacles into the goose pond. And in that strange, forgetful wind, the town changed too. It started small. Someone said they had seen Mosswhistle at the fountain and thought he was part of the entertainment. Then someone else said no, he had wandered into the bakery and touched all the jam jars. Someone else swore they'd heard him muttering to the lampposts. By noon, a small but uneasy question had begun to grow among the grown-ups. What is it exactly? And worse, why is it still here? Mosswhistle didn't notice at first. He was busy helping Iska replant her window box, which had been tossed apart by the unruly breeze. He lined up the soil with his paws and softly encouraged each seedling like a lullaby. But as he walked through town later that day, something felt off. Doors that once creaked open stayed shut. The cobbler, who usually tipped his hat, looked away. A chalkboard sign that had once read, "Jam of the Day, Plum and Gratitude," now read, "Closed for polishing." Even Mrs. Pindle from the Teapot and Turnip didn't come outside when he passed. Then came the whisper. He heard it in the square, from a cluster of grown-ups whose voices dropped when he neared. It's unnatural, that's what it is. Walking around like a person, wearing ribbons. You never know what kind of pest it might attract. We should ask the mayor. Mosswhistle froze. He looked down at himself, at his satchel, his daisy pin, his boots still dusted with flour from the festival. He had not changed, but the wind had. He turned slowly and walked away, not rushed, not weeping, just retreating. Iska found him beneath the clock tower that evening. He sat curled on the steps, paws folded, eyes distant. His ribbon was gone. "They've forgotten," he said softly. "Forgotten what?" "That small things can belong to." Iska sat beside him. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted. Mosswhistle smiled, a tiny, tired thing. "You don't have to. The forest taught me something. When the wind forgets, we must remember louder." He stood. "I need to go for a while." Iska didn't argue. She simply nodded, then reached into her coat and pulled out a folded note. "Someone left this at the bookshop this morning. No name. Just a yellow ribbon tied around it." Mosswhistle took the note. His paws trembled just a little. He didn't read it there. Not yet. That night, he left quietly. Not through the hedge, but through the lantern-lit streets, walking slowly beneath the stars that blinked like sleepy eyes. The note stayed tucked in his satchel, pressing gently against his heart like the memory of a promise. Mosswhistle didn't leave Fernbell to disappear. He left to breathe. He wandered beyond the railway hedge, down paths where foxgloves grew taller than fences, and the earth still held the scent of wild strawberries. For 3 days he walked gently, listening to streams, apologizing to startled birds, and remembering how to be small without being afraid. On the 3rd evening, as the sky poured itself into shades of lavender and milk, he finally opened the note. The paper was soft, folded many times, and tied with a yellow ribbon that had once been bright. Inside, written in careful looping handwriting, "I remember you. I'm sorry I forgot for a while. I still keep a sandwich in my coat, just in case. If you're still looking, I'm in the house with the open window, always. L." That was all. No street name. No signature beyond the letter. But Mosswhistle didn't need a map. The next morning he returned to Fernbell. The wind had calmed. It was no longer confused, just thoughtful. It carried the smell of cinnamon and damp pages. The town didn't exactly welcome him back with trumpets or garlands, but the shopkeepers nodded. The lampposts hummed quietly. A small girl near the fountain offered him a button and whispered, "I saved this for you." And every window in town was closed, except one. At the edge of the square, above the bookbinder's shop, there was a small window open just enough to let in a breeze. A yellow scarf fluttered lazily over the sill, like it had grown there on purpose. Mosswhistle climbed the steps slowly. The door was open. Inside, the room was full of books, coat hooks, soft pillows, a kettle singing to itself, and a bench beneath the window with a teacup already waiting. and beside the bench sat a woman, no longer a girl, with laugh lines at the edges of her eyes and a marmalade sandwich in her hand. She looked up. Their eyes met. She didn't gasp. She didn't ask, "Is it really you?" She just smiled. The kind of smile that only belongs to someone who never truly forgot. "You kept the promise," she said. Mosswhistle nodded, "And you left the window open." That afternoon, the two of them sat side by side, sharing tea, old stories, and comfortable silences. Later, Iska arrived, out of breath, carrying a small basket and 2 new books. And then Anwen, then the mayor, then Mrs. Pindle, who brought scones shaped like hearts and clocks that ticked backward. No one made speeches. There were no parades. But one by one, people came, bringing gifts, apologies, jam, and the quiet kind of warmth that says, "We see you now." Mosswhistle stayed, not in the forest, not hidden, in the room. With the open window, he kept his satchel packed, just in case. He still wandered, still talked to lampposts, still wrote letters to birds. But Fernbell had remembered how to be gentle, and that made all the difference. Because kindness, like moss, doesn't need sunlight to grow, just time and someone to notice.